Hi, this talk is a summary of two published papers. So for those of you who've already read them, you can check out. It's a little difficult for me in this talk to say we did this, we did that, because in some sense I'm a very minor author on for the real work of these papers. They both included a lot of field work, and I was there before and after. But the first two people listed in gray worked on the first of the two papers, and everyone else on the second, which will make sense in a moment. I didn't figure out this. How's that? Those are the two papers. And for those who haven't read the papers, this talk is going to be really simple and superficial. I'm really just going to show you what we saw and not give any explanations. So it's meant to raise questions, I suppose. And the key idea is that we're going to go and visit some societies, say communities, that are too small to make it into national averages. They don't show up in our understanding of around the world variations in life satisfaction. And they're communities that are small, rural, sometimes remote, indigenous, and most importantly, they're mostly subsistence economies. So the way we talk about that is that they're not highly monetized, right? They're a little bit destroyed. There's no communities in the world really who are completely separated from the market economy nowadays. And these populations certainly have information about what's going on out there, and they all trade a little bit. And so we're going to look at market assets they have, for instance, but mostly they are largely they're getting by with fishing and hunting and gathering and so on. And so the premise of all this, why is that interesting? Well, what I haven't said is that they're pretty happy. Okay, so that how do we deal with that in the sense that when we're used to looking at distributions of income by country and life satisfaction, we see somewhat coherent relationships, and they're not going to be very compatible with the idea that that these really so-called poor communities are very happy. And hello, I can skip through this with this crowd. There are issues here, a little bit of life satisfaction versus Cantrell's ladder. I want to say one thing here to describe this. These data are old for the real aficionados. It's probably 2016. But it's the case that across countries, life satisfaction or life evaluations, this is Cantrell ladder data, are fairly closely in a bivariate way associated with GDP per capita. In fact, there are no countries with an average Cantrell ladder score below 4.5, which have, sorry, let me try that again. There are no countries with average incomes below $4,500 with average Cantrell ladder values over 5.5. And there are also no countries that report an average of over 7 Cantrell ladder with incomes that are less than 40K. In other words, there are no happy poor countries, and there are no happy countries that are not rich. So there are various issues I'm just going to dance over, and there are plenty of problems with our data in the details. So, there are reasons already to question of fundamental, say, universal relationship between happiness and income. And of course, there's relative income effects, and there's debates about, still, I would say, there's a lot of uncertainty around Eastland paradox, and there are debates that I hope are now a little bit settled about satiation. But okay, these are all the nice features of why we're interested in subjective well-being. And really the question here is, well, are most of the data about happiness from people globally with plenty of variation, but all playing the same game in a sense, all, in other words, involved in a market economy, and maybe we're overlooking a broader possibility in that the global variation that we're used to thinking about is not as wide as we need to think about. That made sense. So if there's value to this, if we're right in what we're showing, there's something different going on in these societies than we'd expect. Okay, so I'm going to show you two studies, and the history of, I mean, the first one was motivated by some people who are interested in fishing communities, but and so these studies are sort of opportunistic, in both cases, opportunistic investigations based on data that are collected for other purposes. And the first study is just looking at 4 different communities in 2 countries. And the first 2 are in Solomon Islands. So, well, in all cases, these are coastal communities, and they're in two very poor countries. So, I mean, Solomon Islands is ranked something like 159th in HDI, Bangladesh 129th. These are all fishing communities. And in each of these 2 countries, we have one more rural and one more urban. And in each of those, we have between 2 and 6 communities. And then and just to give you some sense of, so that's Australia on the bottom left of this map. And here are the 2 sites for the Solomon Islands, and here are 2 sites from Bangladesh. So in maybe I want to say a little bit more about that, actually. So in the 2 sites in Solomon Islands, Roviana Lagoon, these are fishers who have access to a market, but it's a bit far away and they go infrequently. And the more urban site in Gizo, they're actually fishing every day and taking some of their catch to a market. Okay, so that's sort of the typical difference that they were going after with rural and urban. In Bangladesh, it's a little bit more market oriented in both cases. But in all of these places, a large fraction, significant fraction of the catch is for consumption. Okay, we are going to measure, we're not satisfied with just measuring life satisfaction because we'll be skeptical of it. So we're measuring actually 3 different measures of subjective well-being, as well as the life evaluation. There's an affect balance measure, which you're familiar with maybe from Gallup. So we ask about the day yesterday. Did you dichotomously experience these emotions, happiness, enjoyment? Did you laugh and smile a lot? And also, did you experience sadness, worry, and so on? And then you average the positive ones and average the negative ones and take the difference, and that's the affect balance. There was also an experience sampling ESM method, which means in the Solomon Islands, cell phones were handed out. In Bangladesh, we got people's cell phone numbers. This is a subset of everybody. And over 2 months, 2 separate weeks in the case of Bangladesh, and 2 times in the day, one morning, one evening, people were phoned and asked, "What are you doing?" And then interviewed about emotions that they're feeling. Most people tended to report only positive or negative emotions. In this case, anyway, they were classified and then collected together at the community level. And you'll see there's 1,002 calls for the Bangladesh 2 sites and only 163 at the 2 sites in the Solomon Islands because cell phones ran out of battery. Okay, we also asked in a pretty crude way about income, and this is the market income only. So I won't say more on that now. And there's also we asked about what fraction of your catch do you sell, what fraction of your food do you buy, and took the average of those fractions to make an index about market integration. So this is these are the results. Basically, is where on this kind of plot do these sites fall? There's 2 problems with this graph, I'll admit in a moment, but the 4 light blue sites at the top left are our sites, and the 2 that are least market oriented are in the Solomon Islands, and they're the happiest. And you can see that these are up there, in fact, higher than the happiest countries on the planet. Okay, so how can that be? Obviously, it's a measurement error, right? Well, let's think a bit more. And I'm sorry for the non-log scale. And also, of course, note that the comparison here darker blue spots is a Cantrell ladder question from Gallup, not life satisfaction. Okay, so we'll do a little bit better, maybe. So, so I'm not, okay, that's the overview. So let's see if we can kind of debunk these high values, right? So why are people giving such high responses? Well, one thing that I certainly suspect is, obviously all the people up at the top are just giving 10s because they don't understand the scale. And they're doing this focal value rounding thing. Well, so here are the distributions. Before the distributions, actually on the left is our index of monetization. And so you can see that the two Solomon Islands locations are the least monetized. And we put them here in the order of increasing monetization. And which I'll come back to in a moment. And on the right is the distributions. Just look at the black lines of life satisfaction responses. And so there is definitely some tendency to respond with focal values. You can see lots of answers happening at 5 and 10 for some of them. So what we can do about that is to reduce this scale into 3 and below, 4 to 6, and 4 to 7, and 8 to 10. And that actually gives us the same ordering of these. So it gives us similar results. Okay, but maybe there's something weird about the scale. So let's look at these if we see anything corroborating this from the affect balance. And what we find, in fact, is that the happiest in terms of affect sites are the ones that are least monetized. Similarly, when we ask about momentary affect, we find that the least monetized societies are really happy when we check in with them by phone. So not only then, so there's really two results from this. One is these places are pretty happy. And secondly, the ordering, they're actually happier in the places that are less monetized, even with this small sample. Okay, so I've probably already said all of these, but basically the point is, it seems unlikely that all three of these subjective well-being measures are going to suffer from the same cultural biases or reporting weirdnesses. And the rest are just hand waving. What are the implications of these for our beliefs about the world? And about, as I'll say again at the end, just about how different could life be? So what would life satisfaction look like in a really different world than what we have now? Okay, that's it for study 1. So study 2 is to go on and scale this up a little bit and look all around the world. So now we have 19 locations in 18 countries on 5 continents. This study was also not motivated solely for this particular investigation. This is part of a large collaboration looking at what people know and think about climate change. And so these locations were chosen for their small community attributes and their connection to nature. In other words, these are all largely subsistence, even more so than study 1. A total of 3,000 in-person interviews and random sampling from local censuses was possible in most cases. Here are the locations. And in case you ask questions, we can come back to look at some of the details. So what are we going to do? We're going to try and measure wealth and income. So this is difficult, of course, as always. In all of these communities, wage income and sales are both sporadic. And record keeping of income is rare. So if you ask them what your income is, you don't even do as well as in study 1. People don't have a good sense of that. And of course, income, we'd like to measure consumption always as economists. Well, so our approach is to measure assets, and we're going to use the monetary value of what people do have that are commercial assets in their house. And the way that was done was kind of at a village level. So this is not going to be the ideal measure to compare across villages. But you'll see it's good enough. So we actually, and I say we here again with difficulty, but in each village, we went through a process to choose 10 assets that best captured the variance across respondents, but also were from these categories. So large ones that were rarely owned, down to really common ones. And then full replacement value in the local market was used to evaluate, and then you sum up over the 10 for each household. And then to convert that into an income, which we don't need to do, but we did to express it, we used an asset to income ratio of 1, which is of course a little ridiculous. It's normally we'd think of 5 to 7 in it would be a typical ratio. So this is very conservative. And whoops. And here again is our one plot that shows what we found. So these yellow or orangish dots are what we observed. And we fit lines here through both our small scale societies and the Gallup data to show a relationship between income and life evaluations. There's not one there for the WVS life satisfaction, which is a smaller set of countries, but also it doesn't have as strong a bivariate relationship like Gallup does. Now, as soon as you put in some other controls, you get a perfectly normal income coefficient in a WVS regression for life satisfaction. But anyway, the Gallup is here for completeness. The WVS is the same question, that's life satisfaction. So how would I describe the values? Well, they're fairly high. They again actually go higher than any other country, but they also span a large range. Not everybody's happy. It's not that simple. Okay, and then the other thing is there's actually a relationship between income and life satisfaction, even amongst our communities. And as you can see, they're off sort of the bottom of the scale almost of income compared to what we're used to looking at. Here are the response distributions for life satisfaction. There's no consistent pattern here of focal values. Asking this question was a little bit harder than normal. Some people found it difficult. So in some places, a visual card was used instead of the numbers to choose a position. There was no difference in general if we control for whether or not which method was used, that doesn't seem to make a difference. And then this is the last thing, is to look at the effect of community level income and individual income. And what's of note here, so because you can imagine both effects, that there's comparison effects of others in my village. My satisfaction with my income may be conditioned by what is the standard set in my village, the normal Veblen coefficient. Of course, there's also collective goods. So my village being wealthier should also make me happier through public goods. So we can't disentangle those at all. What we can say is that if you don't control for village with village dummies, you don't explain very much life satisfaction. And a village dummy does explain a lot, right? So there's a lot of properties of a community that are quite determinate of individuals' life satisfaction. And in fact, once you control for village with village dummies, then in fact adding individual income doesn't improve your R squared at all. I don't think that's shown on this. Okay, so this is not the first study of this kind. Feng Yu's own work on Alaska is maybe the most interesting of these. But this is a fairly large study, and so that's it. Just to conclude. Actually, rather than reading these out, let me tell you one more thing I didn't say from study 1. There was also an interview that asked about the determinants, asked people's views of what made life good, and those are also quite interesting. Although, yeah. So just as a general pattern, there was less. Well, do you put that together? That'd be great. So this is a bit surprising, but I don't know how much stock to put in it. The lower monetized societies mentioned more activities, spending quiet time going for a walk, being in nature. And the more monetized societies put more emphasis on family and on social interactions. So the normal, if you say, well, how could these lower income and societies be happy? You think, well, they're not bothered by money. They have more. We know how important social interactions are to humans from this literature in general, and they're all, So that story is certainly part of what's going on. But it's not that simple, because people actually identify not necessarily collective activities as part of what's making life good. I didn't say, you know, fishers are generally quite happy. If you phone somebody when they're out doing artisanal fishing, they're having a good time. What else do I want to say? Oh, it's also not the case that these are somehow, by being small communities, that they're collectivist and egalitarian necessarily, right? So there are people who have status or whatever, for whatever reason, are happier and less happy. And you saw that individual income matters for life satisfaction. So unless I say that out loud, some people will sometimes assume that everybody is sharing everything. That's not the case. Some of these, in this second study, did I mention many of these communities were indigenous, but not all. So some of that variation that you see across communities is to do with different levels of oppression and real difficulties that these people still have. The rest here is just for speculation. So I haven't, you know, buried in here is difficulty still interpreting life satisfaction versus Cantrell ladder, but that's for other work. Okay, please clap.
Wow. Okay. We're gonna have to take only a few. I don't think we can do all of them.
Chris, thank you very much for interesting presentation. I quickly just want to verify, you measured life satisfaction, is that right?
Yes.
And you started off by saying you found that there is this relationship with GDP and life satisfaction. If you've got a high life satisfaction, you've got a high level of GDP.
That's what you started about cross-country variation.
Okay, yeah. And then in the rest, you spoke about happiness.
Oh.
And the point is that if you go and look at positive effect, and I mentioned this yesterday as well, if you look at your smaller communities, positive effect is very high, not life satisfaction. So you will find, if you go and look at positive effect in the World Happiness Report, really not one European country in the top 20. Nordic countries, yes. Those countries are in the top line, they're all developing countries. And I think one should be very sure about the difference between the two. And
one should. So this is a slip, right? So in context, you know, in papers, I will often use the word happiness and make sure to define the beginning if by that I mean what I mean. In this case, the second study was entirely about life satisfaction. There were no affect measures there. And whenever I said happiness, I meant life satisfaction. When I was talking about affective measures, I used the word affect or ESM.
And the other thing is, if you look at subsistence farming, there isn't really a currency like income. I'm glad you used assets, because that's a really good idea to use assets. But a lot of barter training or trading. And I wish if you come to South Africa, I can go and show you those communities. They might not have money, but they're happy. And people don't see it, they forget about it. And so it would actually be so nice to highlight this, because they always say, poor countries are not happy. It's not true. Okay, that was my comment.
Very much appreciated. Just to be clear, I was not speaking about affect for most of this, and it's not the case that it is the case that poor countries report low life satisfaction. So that statement at the country level is true about life satisfaction, and that is what this paper addresses. It's life satisfaction at the country level. The point is that overlooks some very important variation within countries, because there are communities there that may be quite different from what's driving average statistics at the country level.
I'm going to be gender biased and ask for you.
Hi, Chris. Actually, I have a question on behalf of Professor Richard Eastling. We had a very nice discussion about your paper, the second case, about the 19 countries case study. And so his question is, I'm going to summarize. And all 6 of the sub-Saharan African countries have life satisfaction 5 to 6. And only one of the remaining 13 countries have life satisfaction as low as 6. And actually, the 6 sub-Saharan African countries also have the lowest income of the 19 countries. And He's wondering if there's another possible explanation for the low life satisfaction of these African countries. For instance, he has this impression that they are not highly self-sufficient as other countries. He's wondering whether this can explain the low life satisfaction among the African countries, whether it's an alternative explanation.
And
Or-
the key idea is that they're not as self-sufficient
as the
as
other
others.
countries.
Is Dick watching now?
No.
Oh, I see. So I mean, I don't know that I can comment on that. I'm committing myself to doing a bit of work on African countries in the next few months.
Sure.
But this paper is not about those averages.
Yeah, he's wondering whether the lower life satisfaction of these African countries can be explained by like the contacts with the outside world because they are less self-sufficient.
Could be. He should expand on the hypothesis, I think.
Yes. Thanks very much.
Thanks, really interesting stuff. Yeah, I find this area really interesting. So I used to actually work quite closely with Nick Biddle, who's on your last slide, and I've been trying to get someone from his lab to come to this conference for ages because I think the Indigenous perspective is really interesting. My question is whether there's scope because this seems like it's part of a broader effort to do some deeper ethnographic work in these communities to try to tease out some of these nuances about whether they're Indigenous or not, whether the Indigenous cultures are like highly animistic, very collectivist in natural resource use, these kind of things that might allow you to explain which of them have more salience around income or not, these kind of things. Because these are quite big themes, I guess, in the Indigenous perspectives on well-being, and they really change the way you are in the world. Yeah.
N is 19 for questions like that, so you can't choose very many variables. But some of those things we already have.
Okay.
And the collaboration is ongoing, so I suspect in principle the answer is yes.
Oh, great. Well, I'd be very excited to read more.